Hey, welcome back. This is Mike and Marta again. So we're on our final call that we'll be recording today. And Marta and I were talking a little bit before we started the recording, and a lot has come up over the last week. Just, Marta and I were talking about how, the emotions that we went through last week really brought about more than we expected, I think, and I'll talk a little bit about my experience with that. But Marta, I wanted to ask you, what has your experience been like in the past week? I know you have some notes, and I'd like to really just highlight and feature what was your experience like in the last week, and what are some epiphanies that might have come up. So please share.
Yes, one of the things that started even in the call and kind of bled through to the rest of the week was this idea of questioning whether or not I know what these emotions, each one of them, really mean. Like, what do I really know about courage? What do I really know about, fear? And so I found myself looking them up and then journaling about them, like almost like a creative writing assignment. Mm-hmm. Again, working with it in a sense to have it actually heal something in my life. Yeah. So that was one of the things, just like really looking at the words, really grokking them in a way that I hadn't before. But I noticed that giving voice to them last week and allowing them, the lower vibrations or emotions, to really come forth and speak, getting out of the way, that I was able to simply just be with them. And I found myself then living more on the higher vibrations the rest of the week. Mm-hmm. And then not being afraid, of sitting with whatever emotion I was feeling. So this morning I felt some sadness, and instead of, getting myself all busied up and distracted, I actually did the reverse, which is I sat with it and, just kind of examined it. I let it wash over me. I teared up, and and then in doing that, it was gone. It was like a dark cloud that kind of passed and left.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it made me really wonder, what are we doing? What are we doing with this scale? Like, how are people using it? Yeah. And then it set me off on these amazing wild tangents. Researching videos, things that I love to watch, ancient knowledge, things like that. So.
Yeah.
It's kind of it for me. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that this is the work. It's a lot of things that came up for me as well too. Is that this is the work. Processing those emotions, and sharing them and letting relationships strengthen through them as well. Mm-hmm. That's the work. And we were talking earlier before the recording how, I feel like this is now more of a marathon. It's not a sprint, so it's not a sprint towards a goal. It's a marathon in, going deeper. And the way that manifested for me, a lot of things manifested for me this week. But one thing was I realized on these calls as well, I don't really talk about what's most important to me, and that is my wife and my son. And I found myself, something got triggered during that last call, and I found myself yesterday at my work. I plugged my my earbuds in, and I listened to, just this, sappy romantic '80s music, and just a rush of. I was sobbing at my desk that I had to hide from all my coworkers for a bit. But it just made me realize that we only really have this moment. That's it. I talked to other, I actually talked to a fairly famous coach over the weekend as well online, and one of the things that he shared his dreams with me, and his one of his dreams is, making his wife feel like the most heard, cherished, important person on the planet. And I'm like, you know what? I want to make that my goal as well too, my dream. So, so I just let those emotions, those sappy emotions, that sentimentality, just rush over me. And, long story short, I'm making the plans now to have a date with my wife, and not just any date, because I feel like, because we don't have a lot of money, it's hard for us to really go somewhere and do things, and we have a 14-month-old at the moment as well. But we talked a couple months ago about what her real heart's desire would be, is to go back to painting. My wife is an art therapist, Laura, and I said, what, why don't we just take a night, after Micah goes to sleep, and we just paint together. We just work on a painting project together. When we feel like we're really talking, and we're really opening up, and we're really letting those feelings out about how we truly feel about each other, and supporting each other, and what is authentically us. So that's one of the things that came up for me. Another thing that came up, and this was just last night, my son was up a lot crying last night. He's not feeling well, and we're getting very little sleep recently. As I'm sure anyone who's a parent, who's ever been a parent of an infant, can relate. And the thing with that was, most of the night, I was still working out of a habit of, frustration of not being able to sleep, the frustration of, worrying about the future, how am I going to handle, like, this call tomorrow, because I'm going to be tired and fatigued. And, and something inside just said, what, it's all energy, all of this emotion, it's all energy. It's a matter of, are we going with the flow, or are we fighting it? So, as my son was continuing to sob and cry and shout and all of this, I just really opened up to it all, and just let his power kind of wash over me. This is my 14-year-old son, letting his power wash over me. And I just said, and this was after we've done everything we could. We fed him, we changed him, we gave him medicine, we did everything we could. And eventually, he did tire himself out, and he went to sleep almost immediately. If I had to guess, it was probably about 5 to 10 minutes after something shifted within me to just accept all of this power that he's radiating out with his crying and all of that. But I think he found a little bit of peace too, just being in the presence of another person in the room who is not trying to stifle or trying to negate his feelings and what he was letting out, but just letting it wash over and letting it fully express itself. So that was another thing that came up for me, just last night. As all of these lower, what we call them lower vibrating emotions, are just processing. Right. So and it's getting me ready for the marathon. It's so helping me understand the marathon. Yeah.
And I love the two things that you pointed out. That was reflected in something we said earlier. One for sure is just this idea of practicing and just recognizing, being present. I mean, something I read this morning in The Power of Now, practicing the power of now, which is why practice is key for me, and it's very relative to, I think, the idea of a marathon. Because. It does require being present, recognizing what's happening. I love that you're relating to these emotions, which I often do, as energy, simply energy that needs to be transformed or transmuted. Yes. And again, not in a pushing sense or not trying to direct it, but just giving it a little bit more focus, a little bit more presence, allowing it to, just be,
Absolutely.
There was nothing truly threatening about what was happening with your son. We just, when I'm in the presence of a child crying, I always want to change it. And you were so great to just allow it to be. That's his way of expressing at the moment. And this idea of practicing, because that came up earlier in our conversation too, as a product or an output or byproduct of doing the work we did last week. Was recognizing that this does take practice. It's not something that you do once and you confront all these energies and emotions and then you're done with it. It's really a dance. constantly throughout life, sharing that even something that happened 25 years ago, an uncle of mine who was murdered, and how that, it was on the August 29th, the day before my birthday. I will forever kind of recognize and remember it that way. And I'm often surprised at how much emotion is still there, even after 25 years. But it's a different characteristic. It's got different qualities to it. And now I'm exploring it more through this lens of love. He was someone really influential in my life. I was a little kid, and he was the kind of uncle that, he was the youngest one of all the uncles, and so closer to age probably than all the others. And so he had this way about him that made, in his presence, you felt good about yourself, because he always talked about the great qualities you had, and kept emphasizing those things, whether he wanted to, whether he consciously did that or not. That's who he was, and always has been for me. So where before, when this experience happened, it was more about the sort of fear or terror having been murdered, where it was overshadowing something else that was there, which is this deep, just very connected love that I had for him. And so only now, 25 years later, is that starting to become more present, as by way of remembering it.
Yes.
We tend to remember the horrific things,
yes,
and then those horrific things, overshadow all the great stuff that's there. So that's what this allowed me to do.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of unconscious calibration going on there by focusing on the gifts he brought, and how that just kind of lightens things and all of that. So I kind of think of that. We've talked previously, in our own friendship about that process of going from unconscious, going from unconscious competence or incompetence, unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. And I may have said something wrong there, but anyway. But it's that four. It's those four observations going from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. That it sounds like what you were doing was you were automatically emotionally calibrating, and that habit that we observe when we do these calibrations, it sounds like you were moving through the emotions naturally, and it's becoming an unconscious competence.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I learned too. You bring up habit, and I love Augmendino's work. And I just recently did something, the Habit Finder, but I didn't realize until I had a little coaching call that habits are really, the patterns of thinking that we have, and then as we keep, kind of like practicing or going over the same sort of maneuvers or actions that we take in life, that's what we keep reinforcing, that pattern of thinking. But if we really start to create, as Augmendino would say, the good habits that replace the bad habits, and becoming a slave to those good habits, that's what I'm starting to play with, because
that's the first
I'm starting to, exactly, and I'm really starting to see that even things like, the heartaches, the disappointments, all of that is masquerading as something really wonderful. There's a seed of wonderfulness in it. And if we don't make the conscious effort, if we don't take on the marathon, that we'll miss all the wonderful stuff throughout life that is embedded in these heartaches and sorrows, and they may be the access to our greatest strength. So that was very cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. Awesome. Cool. Anything else you want to cover before I start to introduce today's emotions?
No, I think I'm pretty good.
Great. Yep. So after processing a lot from last week, so we're going to be doing that threshold now between anger, pride. We ended with pride into courage. So I like to think of this as kind of like a key change in the emotions, if you want to think of it as a musical metaphor. I think there's some major key changes in these 17 emotions that we explore. Well, 16 in this case, because we started with guilt last week. But I feel like there's a major key change between fear and desire. I feel like there's a major key change where we're starting today, and that's between pride and courage. And we're going to explore two other major key changes later today. I think forgiveness is a big one, willingness, determination into forgiveness and acceptance. And then I think one of the last major key changes is between clarity and love. A lot of what I intuit and what I believe, we talk about social shifts, psychological shifts, shifts in economy, and all of that. And I feel like the wealthiest people in the world, or the people who quote unquote run the world, I feel like they're masters of clarity. And I feel as we evolve as people, we're really helping to step up and raise the bar in transcending from clarity into love. And then we'll explore love, joy, peace, and enlightenment today. But really, I feel like anything really beyond love is just for is just to deepen it even more. We make these distinctions in words between joy, peace, and enlightenment, but really all it is, I think, is just kind of like submitting and really just letting go even more. So some people would say, all there is love, and that encapsulates peace, joy, and enlightenment. But we'll explore energetically what those words unlock for us. So for courage today, I want to start with a frame of reference where, I talk a lot about the Karmic Margin Call Project and economic reform, and as I'm still exploring this process myself, I realize that anything that happens, any attraction of money or economic reform or social shifts, I'm starting to think of that more as a side effect or a byproduct at this point. What we're doing in these conversations, this is the real work. This is what we're here to do. We keep kind of like that. I want to keep that goal kind of like in the background, and I'll still release my writings about it and the structure and the strategies and the goals around that. But really, that's really just an excuse to do the work that we're doing today. And I feel like what we're doing in these calls, they're not activities. This is accomplishing the goal. So as we finish today, we've accomplished the goal. And again, it comes back to that idea of sharing information and letting the listener do what they want with it. This is not about getting clients. This is not about making money. This is about finding the partners who are intended for us at this stage of development in our lives. So the courage that I need to summon at this point is to say exactly what it is the Karmic Margin Call Project is intended to be. And